if it's cold, something like that. So this approval-seeking behavior is something that really is a way of life for a lot of people, and it has to do, there's many causes for it, but it can really interfere with effective recovery. In fact, it can contribute to addiction itself as well, and both for the partners and for the addicts. So what is approval-seeking behavior? It really starts, sometimes it can be a sort of a natural personality type, or it can be a result of external influences such as your upbringing or cultural factors or your education, or even workplace experiences. So sometimes we can have life things that happen to us that give us a very strong message that we need to behave and say the right thing. And if we don't have an internal sense of worthiness, which is another universal for people affected and afflicted by addiction, that lack of self-belief and a generally critical self-view really undermines this ability to kind of assert oneself in a healthy way that really is essential for boundaries, for recovery, for self-worth, for being grounded. So what are some examples? And I have a number of them. One, taking disagreements personally. So when somebody disagrees with something you've said or done, do you take it to heart as a personal slight, end up feeling insulted or upset? And I think, so there's this built-in agreement somehow that everybody's gonna like us and approve of what we do, and it's all gonna go well. And sometimes disagreement is a natural and healthy part of life, actually. And I think oftentimes someone who has approval-seeking behavior is gonna be reluctant to not be upset by that if someone disagrees with them. Another example I wrote down was changing or adapting your point of view if someone is disapproving. So maybe you voice your opinion on some matter, and it could be important or not important, and someone responds with an opposing view. So ask yourself, do you vigorously oppose your, defend your position rather? Do you vigorously defend your position, or do you kind of start to bend a little bit and kind of conform and soften the argument so it's more closely to theirs? And that's something that we find people doing quite a bit. Being afraid to say no. Sometimes we and I suffer from this, we're serial overcommitters, right? I commit to too much stuff, say yes, say yes, say yes, and all of a sudden I'm resentful and burned out and all that. And so that comes right back to me and my tendency to want to make you happy and to be a people pleaser and to get your approval by going along with everything and being the jovial, nice guy that does anything. And ultimately, that pattern doesn't end well. I'm sure everybody's had some experience with that, where we say too much in terms of committing, and then it all goes south. Other examples: not standing up for your own rights, failing to draw a line, failing to appreciate boundaries. Failing to do that just reinforces your own lack of self-worth. And that's one of the problems with this, is that every time we do it, it kind of reinforces this negative image we have of ourselves as if not unworthy, at least our self-esteem takes a hit when we do this. And sometimes even feeling inferior. So I think all these behaviors appeal to our lower selves, our sense that we don't have a right to feel what we're feeling. Other examples: appearing to agree with someone when you don't. Just kind of go along, even though you may think what they're saying is not right or even wrong, but you don't oppose it. You don't take it on, but instead either passively or actively express support. And that again undermines. You don't feel very good in a situation like that. Not complaining when you received unsatisfactory services. Pretending to know something when you don't. I've seen this with some clients where they'll describe being in meetings and it'll be kind of generally discussed, well, did you do this or did you do that? Have you read this or do you know that? And they'll say yes, even though they have no idea, and then panic about what might come up. But they don't want to be upfront about what they haven't done, whether it reflects on them personally or not. And then finally, the final words, and then you're getting a picture of how these look. One I've seen a lot is failing to cope with any level of criticism. People just not handling any kind of negative feedback well. And in fact, for someone who's a people pleaser or has this approval-seeking behavior, criticism is just intolerable. And people will go a long way to avoid being the subject of criticism. They simply can't tolerate it. So how do we get out of this? One, I think, is to really analyze it, to really take a step back and be what we in therapy would use our observational self, right? To take a step out of yourself and look and watch and see, well, when does that occur? Under what circumstances? Is it with authority? Is it in general? Is it in situations that remind you of old situations where you had trouble? But I think really starting to put together the patterns. These things are not, a lot of people feel this is just the way they are, and that's going to be kind of a theme sometimes in these webinars where I'm taking on some of these beliefs where people just think, well, that's the way I am. And I believe, like resilience, we talked about a couple weeks ago, people think they have resilience and they don't. I think it's a skill that we can all learn. And I think this is a skill too. And I think the more we reinforce the people-pleasing behaviors, the more we believe that we aren't worthy and it's not going to work out so well for us. So look at those patterns, analyze where it all began. Then think about the concept of rejection and criticism. I think it's really worth looking at because I think it's something we don't like to think about, we don't look at, and a lot of us have a lot of problems with criticism in general, and rejection, of course, no one likes. But even I think it's useful to be able to take criticism. Scott will appreciate this. When I was in graduate school, a professor encouraged me to submit an article to a journal. And the journal was accepted. They accepted my article. And then it was edited and it was returned to me. And I never opened that envelope. The article wasn't published. I was too terrified to see what critical notation somebody would have made. And now that I've had things edited, there's a tremendous amount of red all over the page. So thank you, Scott. But no, he's very good. But I think that inability to accept criticism, or was just, for me at least at that point in my life, was really something I had to look at. So to really understand, everybody gets rejected, everybody gets criticized. I can learn something. It's not a tragedy. It's an opportunity really to learn something. I've tried to begin to appreciate disapproval and criticism of other people as a form of feedback. And that may be legitimate feedback, it may be their issues. But I think it's a natural kind of element of any relationship in the world. So I've learned to try to build up my tolerance for criticism and feedback. And finally, the last point I think is just to really believe you have every right to be you, right? To really stand up for yourself and believe in you. And I think for a lot of addicts and a lot of partners, that's not a natural state of belief. And I think that's why fellowship and 12-step programs or whatever fellowship may be, support groups, social support network, all those are really important tools to help us to reflect back to us the rights we have in terms of feeling worthy and not needing to always sort of seek approval, but to really stand for ourselves and take it up. To respect the rights of others to their opinion, but to know that we have a right ourselves to what we feel. So that's kind of a quick and dirty summary of people-pleasing behaviors. Throw it open. Scott, do you have any thoughts? I can't hear you.
There we go. Now I'm unmuted. Yeah, I think you covered it really well there. I just want to remind everybody, ask questions through the Q&A. You can ask questions about these approval-seeking behaviors or anything else that's on your mind. This is kind of an open-ended discussion, and it tends to travel a little bit, and we're good with that. We actually have a question already. The question basically is, excuse me, can passive aggressiveness be a version of what we're talking about here? Where does passive aggressiveness fit into this?
Yes, and this is from someone who just noted they celebrate an anniversary, so congratulations.
Yes.
That's really
right.
Wonderful. Really wonderful. So could being a people pleaser, could being passive aggressive be an extreme version of that? I think totally. I think if you think of the people pleaser or approval seeking person as someone who can't tolerate criticism or rejection or negative feedback, what are they going to do if they want to express some opinion of their own? Oftentimes they're not going to be direct, especially if it's angry, if it's fear, if sadness, if it's an uncomfortable opinion. But especially, I think, anger. People, instead of it being direct about it, will be passive aggressive. And what is passive aggressive? Passive aggressive is being is stating your opinion indirectly. So passive aggressive might be being angry with someone, but instead of discussing with them, going around and telling your mutual friends what a jerk that person is. Or I've had extreme examples of clients like having someone let the air out of their tires, or undermine them, or there's many ways we could be passive aggressive. But it's basically taking that anger or resentment typically, and instead of being direct about it and owning it and having a right to it, perhaps, then they instead do something indirect with it. So passive aggressive is really unhealthy behavior. It's something that I think a lot of people pleasers fall as kind of their natural state, and I think it's something we have to aggressively, wrong word, we have to move out of that behavior into assertiveness and a healthier communication. But yeah, I think passive aggressiveness totally fits in this conversation, and it's a very classic display of that.
Yeah, passive aggressiveness for me is always kind of related to a lack of self-esteem. I don't feel like I have the right to tell you what I'm thinking or feeling or wanting or needing. So I'm just gonna stew about it and you know, not resolve the situation. You know, I have a sponsee, and this is kind of passive aggressive. You know, we'll be talking about a specific issue and how he might resolve it. I'll make some suggestions, and he'll pick the one or two that sound good to him and say, yes, I'm going to do that. I'll do it when I get home. And then I meet with him a week later, and he hasn't done it. And it's not really, he's not mad at me. He just doesn't want to do it. So instead of saying, you know what, I don't want to do any of those things, he'll agree to one and then not do it. I'd rather have him say, I don't want to do any of those things. I'd rather know up front. Yeah. So. Yeah,
you remind me of being late, you know, just not showing up or showing up late, that kind of stuff, not turning in things. That, all example.
Yeah, lateness is a passive aggressive FU most of the time. And that's how I always receive it. I don't like when people are late on me, but that's my problem. We've got another question here. I'm so pleased to hear you speak about this tonight. I can appreciate the importance of analyzing and observing rejection, resentment, criticism, etc. in oneself. But how do we go about changing our reaction? How do we do this in our day-to-day? And what are we changing toward?
Great question. So I think, to me, half the battle is just having information. So I think that idea about really analyzing and looking in a mindful way, when does this, just watching yourself, when does this occur? Under what situations? With what kind of people? In what kind of state am I? Am I worn thin, tired? Am I feeling overworked? Am I feeling besieged? Whatever it may be. So understanding that, that's half the battle. And I think putting those patterns together, and that's where I think our friends and support people can be really helpful. And it may be somebody like Scott as a sponsor saying, hey, look, this is what I think I see you doing, in terms of pointing out the behavior. But so we get that feedback from the universe, but then what? And that's the essence of your question. I think then we really have to go internal and really look at our self-esteem and our self-worth. How do we feel about ourselves? You know, what do we deserve? What's good about us? And that I say that very quickly, but that's a huge piece of work for any addict, any partner of addict. I guarantee there's a lot of issues of self-worth and self-esteem. And I think these are old issues. They go way back to childhood in almost every case. And so they're old, entrenched patterns. But I think once we know they're there, we can start to work. And the change for me, at least, comes by working on how we feel about ourselves. And that's a slow process. But I think it takes baby steps. It takes experimenting. It can take, you know, sending back your uncooked salmon next time and seeing if the world stops, or if maybe you get a meal that's more to your liking. Taking little risks, I think, was a way, like baby steps is a great way to assert yourself, to express yourself, to experiment. And when inevitably someone comes along and says, well, that's just wrong, or you're an idiot, or whatever they may say, just to have enough internal confidence to either say, well, they're right, I was kind of being a jerk, or they're total idiots. I am justifying what I say. So, in other words, we're not spinning around reacting. You want to drop out of that reacting place, and really, I do a gut check. And there's a word I like called discerning, where there's the situation, there's something going on, and I try to kind of go inside myself a little bit and discern what am I feeling about this, and what do I need to do, and what's the healthiest way, what's the way with integrity to respond to the situation. And it may not be to say yes all the time when we mean no, or to go along when we don't like it. I think we can see examples of systems all throughout our country where that kind of behavior can really lead things astray. So I think the knowledge is really important, and then the ability to take little risks, and then finally to really integrate that in a larger way in your life. And I think it can be done. And I think it's an essential piece of healing for both partners and addicts, to really learn how, not only how we communicate with each other, but learn to have grounding within ourselves and be okay, and know that we deserve all the best.
Yeah, I really agree with David that it's a process of sort of unlearning old messages. One of the two primary messages I learned as a kid were I was not allowed to have feelings ever, period. And I could do anything as long as my mother did it for me. I was better than everybody else, but not good enough. That's what I learned as a kid, and I carried that into adulthood. And it made it very hard for me to set boundaries. It made it very hard for me to respect other people's boundaries, because, if I don't have my own boundaries, I don't understand yours. It made it very hard for me to accept criticism. I wasn't necessarily a people pleaser, but I did not react well to criticism. I was horrible at it, and I had to, the first 2 years I was around recovery and doing therapy, I was doing affirmations every morning, looking in the mirror. I am enough. My feelings matter. It's okay to say no. And I felt like an idiot. If anybody remembers the old Stuart Smalley skits from Saturday Night Live, I was like, oh, this is so stupid. But eventually it kind of sunk in, just acting as if long enough, and also being around people with decent boundaries through recovery was very helpful for me. They were able to model for me what I didn't learn as a kid. But it took a long time. And I would say what you're working toward is having enough self-esteem that you can react honestly instead of out of fear.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some questions here. Was just at dad's visiting. I'm going to see my parents next month. Yeah. Still have that phantom child wanting dad to not just be talking and listening to himself speak while I'm interested in him. And then when I have something to say, he checks out and goes back to what he was saying. Very hurt and sad by this, seeing how I don't have the ability to change it, chronically disappointed.
Yeah, so that's a really painful situation, and one that I think is not terribly unusual, at least in the addict world. But that's just this really distant, remote parent who's basically cut off and self-interested, and it's all about themselves. You can't say narcissist, I don't know your dad, but I think that's narcissistic kind of behavior, to be really self-absorbed and really tune people out unless it really has to do with them or their message. And I think to have a child grow up in that situation is really painful because of the matter of neglect. And I think this neglect issue, where the message there is that you just don't count, you don't matter. And I think I've talked before on this webinar about how kids, when they're exposed to those kind of messages, take it in, they believe it, and they continue to believe it even into adulthood. It may not be conscious, but they're part of them. These old beliefs, Scott talked about some of his as a child, those old beliefs really operate as kind of software in the background that are guiding some of this. And I think it sounds like now as an adult, when you go back and that pattern is replicated, you see it, and you see your own reaction, how hurtful it is. And I think actually that's not a bad thing to see the pattern. I think you end by saying chronically disappointed. I think the disappointment comes from looking to your dad to react differently, and he may or may not. But I think the behavior there that I would suggest maybe you look at is changing those expectations and then behaving accordingly. To take care of yourself, and that may mean, by the way, not being around your dad as much, so as to just avoid being triggered like that. But I think it's important to note the pattern. I think then all you have control over is you and how you're going to react to that situation and what you're going to do about it, if anything. But I would really get some tools. In addiction, we talk about relapse prevention, and what that is simply is identifying really kind of high-risk situations and developing a plan to deal with them in advance before you're in that situation. And I would talk to your friends and support system about this situation with your father and get some feedback on what they suggest you do differently, how you might react differently. And I'll tell you, it's probably going to feel awkward. If we've spent a lifetime, this is my experience, I spent a lifetime kind of learning these behaviors, and the first times for a while when I was practicing, trying to be assertive or express my needs or get in touch with stuff, it was awkward and it didn't feel right, and it kind of came out less than smooth. But that's okay, and I learned how to do it, and I think that's the key here too. But I would really encourage you to get feedback from your peers and about that situation and what you can do with you and your reaction, because that's really all you have control over.
Yeah, other people are who they are. The only person we can change is ourselves. We can change our thinking. We can change how we react to other people. We can't change what they do. When I go home to visit my parents, I lower my expectations. I know I'm not going to get what I'd like to get because it's just not available. They're not capable of it. They're nice people. They're not capable of giving me everything that I would like to get from them.
Right.
And I find that I'm able to enjoy time with them. I'm able to enjoy what's available, right, rather than pining for what's not.
I think with parents particularly, those situations are so loaded because the dynamics are so old. So I think we are, I've had similar situations like this with a parent, and you find yourself in kind of a reactive state, even before the thing gets going, because I'm so triggered. I know all the moves, I know what's happening, and I get lost in that before it's even played out. So it really kind of hijacks you when you're in that situation. So I really would encourage you to develop strategies to change your reaction.
The questions are pouring in today. Thank you, everybody. As far as criticism goes, my porn addict husband tends to look for criticism when there isn't any. I'm wondering if denial or ego has something to do with that.
Gee, I don't know about that. Oftentimes addicts kind of avoid receiving any kind of critical messages, even though they're often bombarded with them. There's all kinds of things that could be going on there. There's something called rejection, where people do things and kind of look for criticism because they know they've done something and often find it. But they can it's really a matter of their own critical self-talk that gets kind of spills over. I'm not sure it's denial. I'm not sure it's ego either. But I think sometimes an addict will call himself out or want to before he gets called out or she gets called out. And I think it's that projection of like, I know what I did, it's bad, and sort of getting the feedback before it can come. Scott, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's a defense mechanism that kicks in. I mean, parts of me, especially early in active addiction and early in recovery, there was like a little emotional bruise or a big emotional bruise that sometimes people would rub up against without intending to. And I would react as if they intended to. So that could be what's happening. I mean, addicts we are generally damaged, traumatized, neglected, abused, whatever. And, until we spend some time working on that, the bruise is there. We just pick scabs off or whatever gross metaphor you want to use.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of a reversal of what we sometimes see. But the thing there, again, criticism on both sides is really kind of pointless. It just drives that reactive chain of denial and defense and reactivity. So I think criticism probably plays no productive role whatsoever. I think you can share your feelings, you can share critical feelings, you can share your thoughts about the behavior of someone else. But I think I always tell my clients this, to really listen to themselves, and if their vocabulary or for what they're saying has a lot of you, as opposed to kind of I, they're probably out of balance. And I understand the desire to say you this, you that, but really it's not productive because the person receiving that tunes it out and gets defensive. But also it's again putting the focus on the other person that you're pretty powerless over. And so I always suggest they talk about I was really upset when you did X, Y, Z. That really hurt my feelings when you said blah, blah, blah. So there's nothing you can do with that. It's your straightforward feeling. It's the behavior. No one can really argue with that. And I think it's about as clear as you can get. So criticism tends to be, I think, just counterproductive in general.
Yeah, that's a great tip for letting someone know what's going on with you. Question, are we talking just to addicts in recovery, or are we talking to everybody?
I think there's a couple of comments tonight there. Hi. Yeah, I think we're talking to everybody here. Everybody can learn from this. I think an addict in their disease is going to have a lot more trouble with this, if it's possible at all, to sort of follow some of these guidelines. But I guarantee you the addict in their disease has by far the lowest self-worth and self-esteem of anybody in this conversation. So they may be more defensive, more guarded, more defended, but they're not feeling so great inside. But no, the recommendations here are for everybody. But I think probably people with some recovery or on the way to recovery can benefit most from this.
Yeah, I mean, addicts we're afraid that other people will reject us or criticize us or whatever. So instead of going to them with our needs, we go to a substance or behavior. And then when we get sober, we don't have that substance or behavior. Or
those people sometime either.
Yeah. But we can overcompensate with, approval-seeking behaviors and overreactions and all that stuff. So yeah, how do I work with long-standing resentments towards others? That's a big question. Do I have to check myself to see if those feelings are valid, or do I attempt to confront those people whom I resent with my concerns? I feel this could help. It seems unfair for me to silently resent people without giving them a chance to understand my side of things. Confrontation feels very challenging. Are there guidelines for healthy confrontation? Good question.
Wow. There's a lot in there. So first of all, resentments. I think resentments are really toxic. toxic for everybody, but especially toxic for the addict. Because resentments are really, and I distinguish resentment from anger. Anger is a really not a pleasant emotion, but it's a healthy emotion. It's a normal one. Anger is information for us. It tells us we're reacting to something that we don't like, and that's useful. When that anger doesn't, often in what we're talking about tonight, doesn't get expressed properly, it kind of gets buried. If I feel that I'm really angry with Scott, but I can't tell him because I like him, he's my friend, then I might get a slow resentment. And that's that unexpressed anger that starts to cycle around. You know, you talk about people having free rent in your real estate there. It's that phenomenon of this taking on almost a larger than life issue. So, and resentment, it's one of those dead ends. There's nothing productive in resentment. There's no therapeutic fruit that we can glean from that. It's just going to be make everybody miserable. So you're right to sort of figure out how can I work with resentment. Now, what you do with it. This is where having a really useful support system is going to be essential, because one of the things that help an addict in this regard are the steps, and they're very specific guidelines and a sequence of when we share our feelings with someone, when we share our feelings, what we've done and how we feel about it, until we're really clear on ourselves. So I think the first step always is to really get clear on what your motivation is, what your feeling is. Is it this situation, or does it really remind you of an older situation? You know, I learned after a while that when I was triggered, it wasn't so much about the person in the current situation, but it reminded me of old stuff that was unresolved. And so I think we have to understand what's going on and be really clear. And I think only when we're really clear on our intention and our motivation is it useful to think about maybe talking with the other person. And I think that should be used sparingly. I think really, well, as I think about clients over the years, there's been a few good results from that, but I think often, unless the timing is really perfect, there's a lot of hard feelings on both sides. There's a lot of misunderstanding. There's a lot of chunks of the story that have kind of fallen away or dropped out. And I think it can really just kick up old things and be really harmful. You know, we talked about disclosure here before. I think, you know, this is something that has to be done with sensitivity and care. And especially, I think, if there are relationships that you really value, that's another maybe way to sort these out. Is this, you know, something, the woman at the grocery store who looks at me cross-eyed every time I come through, you know, I don't really care. But if it's a significant person in my life, then I do have to deal with it in a more constructive way. But I think it may be my motivation to go and have a heart-to-heart and really have them hear me in terms of what I feel and what they did or didn't do that made me feel upset. That person may not be a willing participant in that conversation. They may not want to hear from me. They may have a totally different opinion. And it can just stir up a lot of stuff. And mostly it's going to cause a reaction in me for feeling kind of rejected or hurt again. So the whole thing escalates. So I'd be very cautious about trying to make yourself heard. I would be, do some work with your sponsor, with your friends, with yourself, and work it out internally. What do you need from yourself in this situation? And then move on. I think it's just, also, I really believe it's important for us, whether you're a partner or an addict, to really live in the present moment and be forward looking. And I think a lot of this stuff, it just keeps us mired in that wreckage of the past that we really need to free ourselves of.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not 100% in agreement with working through it internally. There's a statement in this question: it seems unfair for me to silently resent people without giving them a chance to understand my side of things. And as someone on the receiving end of resentment, I'll tell you a story. I was at a dinner party. I got a work phone call. I stepped out to answer the call. About a week later, the host asked if we could go to coffee, and he said, I have a resentment. I need to share it with you. And he had talked to his sponsor, he had talked to his therapist, he had, he had worked through a lot of it. And he said, and he did exactly what David described in his answer to the previous question, which was, when you answered the phone in the middle of my dinner party, it made me feel as if you didn't want to be there. And that really hurt me. And I was so grateful that he shared that with me. Number one, that he trusted me enough to share that with me. And I was able to apologize and make amends. And it was somebody that I really like and care about, and I certainly didn't want him to feel that way. But I no longer answer my phone during dinner parties, unless it's an emergency. And I was grateful for him for telling me that. But there are other things. Yeah, you kind of work through them a little differently sometimes, because you risk, another set of rejection. He knew that we were friends, and I like him, and I think it was safe enough for him, and it was still a very difficult thing for him to do. I know. So.
But I think the magic potion there is that element of safety, and really each of you valuing the relationship.
Yes.
In a way that it was important to work that through.
Yes, absolutely. Safety is a key there.
Yeah.
Hi, Dr. David. Appreciated our time together in LA with Dr. Rob and the group. Impulsive fast. This must be one of our Seeking Integrity LA graduates. Hello. Welcome. Impulsive fast responses have been a challenge for me, especially if I found myself under pressure. Learning the source of some of these shame-based feelings has helped me greatly. At this point in early recovery, relying on my recovery, waiting, and seeking help from my sponsor, recovery partners, is incredibly important to ensure that my responses are completely truthful and appropriate.
Wow. Yeah, well, thank you for your comment. And you sound like you're doing some really good work. That process of not reacting, I think, that whole essence of reactivity is a really bad thing for addicts, because I think we really have to be intentional and we have to be mindful. And if we're reacting out of an emotional part of our brain that doesn't necessarily always have our best interests. And also that emotional part of our brain is usually like 4 or 5 years old. So if you think of yourself as reacting from that sense, it's never good. But it's often defensive. And I see this a lot in couples where they've been together so long, they've argued so much. If there's a conversation going on, one starts to talk, the other's not even listening, kind of like the dad and son perhaps before. The partner's not even listening. They're preparing the defense, right? They've tuned the other one out, and they're going through, and oftentimes they've gone through this dance so much, they go like A, B, C, X, Y, Z. They jump to the nuclear point at the end. So I think that reaction never does anybody any good, but to slow it down, to be thoughtful about it, and to really have a network that you can process these things with. I think you said something else really important there about shame-based feelings. I think really understanding the source of that, when there's shame, when there's other feelings of remorse or sadness, oftentimes if we're not feeling worthy or safe, we express our feelings or our reaction to those feelings defensively. We like that no one see that we're really feeling the way we're feeling. And we do it fast. And I think men tend to do it fast too, reactively. So all that's really good. Slowing it down, not reacting, really going. I try to help my clients go underneath that reaction, slow it down and see what's really going on. Let's do a little, if you think about movies where a character comes in sometimes and like everything slows down and freezes and they're walking around, feel these people, kind of slow down that moment and see, okay, what's really going on here? Drill down in that. And then is it shame? Is it fear? Is it sadness? What's really going on that's prompting me to react in a certain way? So I think that's really, really great work. Really great work. I'll say it before too, but I'll say it here because it's appropriate, I think, that anger, when we're feeling anger, that's not the bottom of the feelings. Anger is a reaction. And so I think it's a healthy feeling, as I mentioned before, if we don't get stuck in it. But anger is always secondary to something else. I have a friend that say it has a traveling companion. And it's almost always sadness, fear. I'd say sadness and fear, probably. and probably fear most of all. But I think if you're feeling anger, to really, this takes a little bit of self-control to drop down underneath that and see what's really going on. What's that inner child in you experiencing? And that is the key to your reaction, not the anger, but the sadness, the fear, the shame, whatever it may be. And then we can learn how to react appropriately. And guess what? Those feelings start to heal. As long as we're reacting with in a quick way, in an inappropriate way, in a way that doesn't really solve the problem, those things just continue to fester. And I think the only way to heal and get through that stuff is to start changing how we address them and how we deal with them. So bravo to you. I just want to underline one word that you said there at the end, connection. And I think that's so incredibly important. And that's one of our big messages at Seeking Integrity, of course, is but that connection piece. We need each other. We cannot do this by ourselves. And that connection is vital. I think more and more, even the science of addiction is showing at a neuronal level the need to be connected and how that affects our physiology and how we think and act. So good for you.
I love this next question. I'm 56 gay and have never had a long-term relationship. What type of relationships should I pursue to help me overcome my compulsive porn and masturbation addiction?
Hi. Well, thanks for writing. Yeah, so I guess by the nature of the question, what I'm interpreting, what type of relationship should I pursue to help me overcome? So to me, that says there's a seeking of some kind of external fix for what's going on. And I think that's a painful path that probably won't be very productive. Because I think sometimes if we're feeling, and you don't say you're feeling this, I don't mean, but as an example, if one's feeling needy or lonely, and I'm a little older than that in the gay community, I'm in a relationship, but I know how the gay community works. And it can be a pretty lonely and harsh place for those of us who are aging well. But I think that relationship, it's a mistake to look for the fix outside of you. And I think really the solution has got to come within. And it's a relationship that I think will fix you, but it's going to be the relationship with yourself. I think worked with so many gay men over the years who have that phenomenon, looking for other people, places, things to give them worthiness and validation and make them feel okay. And I think if you can create a relationship with yourself, and by that I mean really having compassion for yourself, having compassion for the person that has gone through what you've gone through, whatever that may be, to really embrace how you may have been hurt, to embrace your strengths, to really find out kind of who you are. And then go with that. And in my experience, and by the way, it's perfectly fine not to be in a relationship. I think it's a mistake to think that's the ideal and necessity to be happy. It's certainly not. But if you choose to be in a relationship, I think you're going to make better choices if you've developed a good relationship with yourself first. I haven't seen it in a while, but there used to be I think a horrendous piece of jewelry online on those QVC or whatever. It was like a love necklace with a heart that was in two pieces, and one person would wear one hat and the other would wear the other half, and together we are one. I mean, that's this big X. That's the total wrong way for any healthy couple, I think. I think we have to be two complete whole people that come together and create a pair of two complete whole people. So yeah, I would befriend yourself, have some compassion for you, get to know you. And I think then whatever choices you want will be there, I believe. So yeah, love yourself and get acquainted with you.
Yeah, I've got to chime in. First, yourself. My path was first I got comfortable with myself, then I got comfortable with my higher power. Then I got comfortable with people in recovery. I made friends with them. I have worked my way up to a cat. Steady progressions. So yeah, yeah, so many people in recovery, especially sex you know, love addiction recovery, think that the right boyfriend or the right girlfriend is going to fix it. And that's just not how it works. So this goes back to the father-son situation from earlier. Lowering expectations of others versus trying to tactfully express disappointment. Is there room for both?
I would say yes. I think it's important to have a realistic expectation of others, and that may mean lowering, it may not, but I think we really have to have a realistic appraisal of what the person that we're talking about is capable of. I think some people aren't capable of listening or hearing or understanding or giving us what we need, and the sooner we stop trying that, probably the happier we'll be. On the other hand, if a relationship is important to us, and a parental relationship certainly is, I mean, I think all of us, no matter how bad it's been over the years, want some sense of healing of those relationships as we get older, especially. So I think, yeah, there's room to tactfully express. I think it's always appropriate to tactfully and assertively express how you feel. I mean, there's no, I can't think of a situation when it's used with consideration that's not appropriate. It's important for us to be able to express that, and it's important for significant people in our lives to be able to hear it. So yeah, definitely. But I think to go in and open your heart and share how you're feeling and hope that it's all going to shift may just set you up for more pain. So I think definitely have both. I think to have realistic expectations, but also remember, when we express stuff, it's not for the other person, it's for us. And so it may be important for you to express that to the person. And like we know with making amends and the steps where we can't guarantee the outcome, sometimes people will agree with what bastards we've been, which happened to me during my fifth step. But so you never know what's going to happen. But yeah, and you have to be okay with all of that. But yeah, I think the other thing I would do, and this is kind of the theme of the night, is to really check out every move with your peers and tell them what you're going to do and get some tips. The other thing I would do, there's a concept we call bookending, where if you're going to be kind of in a high stress situation, so for example, you want to have that conversation with your father, and it's probably going to be a pretty difficult one. You bookend that conversation with reaching out to your friends to let them know what you're doing, to get support. Say, I'm going in, we're going to have the talk, and then you promise to call them on the way out. And so they know the situation is kind of contained within some supportive calls and communication, and it gives it some structure without kind of hijacking your life for the day or the week or the year. Yeah.
Just so everybody knows, we got a lot of questions today. We're not going to be able to get to all of them, so I apologize in advance. I do want to get this one out, though. What does intimacy even mean?
What is that, 5 words? That's a short little question that asks a whole lot. Yeah, so yeah, we do toss that word around a lot. So to me, intimacy means sharing parts of myself and being vulnerable to someone. And to me, there's different kinds of intimacy, right? There's intimacy with my husband, with whom I can share everything and I feel vulnerable and safe. But I can have other levels of intimacy with friends, with maybe family members that don't know everything about me, but know a good bit, out to sort of casual acquaintances who know far less. So intimacy is not a black and white thing. It's kind of a graded thing, depending on the relationship for me. But I think the core element of intimacy is the ability to be vulnerable, to say to someone I'm intimate with, I feel sad, I feel hurt, I feel broken, I feel great, but to really show my flaws. For people in relationships, or if you had someone who's cared for you and been really sick. And I've had those moments in my life when I was really kind of helpless and in a bad way physically, and where you kind of whatever, you have no pride anymore. But I think intimacy in those moments, to be able to share that and trust people that are going to be there and care for you in those moments. I mean, that's kind of forced intimacy and vulnerability, really, but it can happen at every different level. But I think vulnerability is the key word for me, just being able to expose myself and how I really feel to someone, to take a chance.
And to receive that from them, I think it's a shared emotional knowledge and acceptance at a deep level. There's an empathy, there's a vulnerability. Yeah, vulnerability is the key word. I'm going to skip ahead of some questions because this one I think is a great way for us to take it out today, since we've talked about this so much. Are you saying that if we learn to work well with our anger in the present, it could transform our attitudes about past resentments as a byproduct of that work?
Yeah, so I think that all the work we do in the here and now has a direct impact on some of that stuff. I do trauma therapy. There's a trauma therapy called EMDR, and the concept is that you deal with one trauma, and they're attached in these chains, and you deal with one, and it kind of resolves everything that's kind of like that or similar or attached to it. And I do believe that if we work on our anger and our ability to manage it and deal with it, a lot of that stuff does get resolved. Not automatically and not all of it, but I think it's tremendously helpful to relieve the burden of all that heavy stuff that we carry around. And remember, anger is not the bottom, right? Anger, it's sadness, it's fear, there's other emotions under there. That's the real stuff that we need to deal with. That'll help resolve those old feelings. Anger, in a way, and this is a perfect example, anger is a great teacher. I mean, anger is a little indicator on our dashboard that, hey, something's not right. And we're always angry at somebody else, but why am I reacting this way? What's going on? What is this? What is triggered? The other person may have been a total jerk, okay, but why is it bothering me so much? And so it's important information. And I think the things that happen to us today are directly connected to all that other stuff before. So I think there's great benefit in learning how to manage it. Huge benefit.
Yeah. I mean, almost all of my anger in the present is connected to the core of shame that I got in childhood. The negative self-beliefs, I'm not good enough, I don't matter, all of that I talked about earlier. When I get angry now, I can always trace it all the way back to that. I've done a lot of work on that, and the whole chain, it really, I think David nailed it, the whole chain lessens a little bit. You take a link out of the chain, it gets weaker. You still got some chain left, but it's not as strong as it was. And I don't carry around as many. I guess I can't work on my anger in the present without working on my anger in the past. And through that, I'm not carrying around as many resentments from a long time ago. I don't know if that made sense. Probably not.
No, it did. There's one comment just before that I think is important, because they said, I thought you said connection is important. And connection is absolutely vital. But if we are in a toxic connection, staying in that pattern and dynamic doesn't do anybody any good. So I think we have to be aware of the nature of our connections, right? And seek out healthy ones. But definitely connection is the way to go. Yeah.
David, anything? We're pretty much out of time, everybody. I'm sorry we didn't get to everything. David, is there anything you want to say to take us out?
Yeah, I'm really loving all the questions tonight, and this obviously resonated. And what I'd like to do, if you have ideas for topics or subject matter that you would like me to cover in these future webinars, please send them to me at david@seekingintegrity.com. And I'd be happy to incorporate this, because this is for you, and it's much more exciting for Scott and me if there's stuff going on and we can answer it and people are engaged. So feel free to reach out, and I'd be happy to build this in. This obviously resonated. So David@seekingintegrity.com.
And if you can't remember that one, on the Sex and Relationship Healing website or the Seeking Integrity site, just click contact us and say, hey, this is a topic for David, and you'll email directly to us. We had a couple of people say, thank you for a great webinar. Thank you for a great webinar.
Yeah, indeed.
And thank you, David.
Thank you. Great.
All right. We'll see everybody next week.
All right. Take care, Scott. Bye.